Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Best Practices for Leveraging Automation and Analytics in IT Operations. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speakers are Steve Brasen, Managing Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates, and Martin Klaus, Director of Product Marketing at VMware. Steve's career at EMA follows 20 years of experience in IT system support, engineering, and management for high technology, telecommunications, and financial institutions. Martin is an expert in a broad range of technologies, including operational analytics, log management, capacity planning, and configuration compliance, as well as the people and process issues surrounding those areas. And before I turn things over to our featured speakers, I did want today's audience to know that Steve and Martin will be taking your questions throughout the course of the presentation. You can log them anytime using the Q&A functionality located in the right-hand column of your screen. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will be receiving a follow-up email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow that will include the on-demand playback, a PDF of the speaker slides, as well as a white paper on today's topic. So be on a lookout for that email from Enterprise Management Associates. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Steve Brasen. Steve?
Thank you, Raleigh, and thank you all for joining us today for our discussion on optimizing IT operations with the use of automation and analytics. As part of our presentation, I'm very excited to be able to share with you today the results from primary research we recently performed on this topic, which will provide a clear picture of the state of IT operations management, including key challenges and solutions introduced by enterprises across a broad spectrum of industries. As Raleigh mentioned, joining me today in this discussion is VMware Director of Product Marketing, Martin Klaus. And Martin, I'd like to invite you to chime in at any point if you have any questions. And Raleigh, please also let us know if there are any questions from the audience. I find these presentations are much more insightful when they are interactive, so I very much encourage participation.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here.
So first, a quick look at our agenda. We'll set the stage with a brief discussion on IT operations, and we'll provide some background on the recent research we performed. The research results have been logically organized into 4 distinct categories. Now, the first identifies how business requirements for IT operations are evolving, as well as the practices being adopted to meet those emerging requirements. Next, we'll look at some of the barriers to success enterprises have experienced while adopting these new approaches to IT management. And then we'll look at how automation is being employed to simplify management tasks, increasing business agility and reducing costs. And we'll discuss how analytics is being applied to automated processes to maximize the effectiveness and efficiency of IT operations. And finally, we'll sum it all up with some conclusions on best practices for IT operations. Information technologies are at the heart of every modern-day enterprise. It is simply impossible to compete in today's dynamic marketplaces without an internet presence and the availability of production IT services to support customers and to optimize the productivity of a workforce. Now, to be successful, IT services must be eminently reliable, highly available, flexible, and secure to meet business requirements and compliance objectives. Now, in most organizations, it is incumbent on IT operations to not only meet these business demands, but to do so while meeting established budget restrictions. Maintaining that careful balance of maximizing IT performance while minimizing costs is challenging even under the best of conditions. And most IT managers will tell you that their environments are very far from being the best of conditions. Legacy hardware and software infrastructures, increased requirements for security and compliance, and the growing need to support more mobile and demanding workforces all conspire to place an unprecedented amount of pressure on IT operations management. To gauge the state and effectiveness of enterprise IT operations' ability to meet these expanding requirements, VMware actually sponsored EMA to conduct primary research. It's a survey-based research evaluating real-world conditions and use cases in IT operations. We developed a detailed survey asking questions on a variety of IT operations topics and disciplines and distributed it to IT professionals from a very diverse range of industry verticals. In total, the survey netted more than 250 respondents, and all of them were vetted to ensure they were knowledgeable about their organization's IT operations. Respondents were limited to just mid-sized businesses, which we defined as those between 1,000, organizations with between 1,000 and 5,000 employees. Now, the reason that we targeted this particular demographic, mid-sized businesses are particularly able to, required to address the most difficult challenges to managing IT operations. They must maintain the same level of IT performance and reliability as their larger competitors, but have much more stringent budget constraints. So in short, they really must do a lot more with a lot less, and ensuring that the management technologies, practices, and solutions they adopt provide a wide range of support capabilities. Additionally, mid-sized businesses typically have smaller-sized support organizations, and the fewer IT support professionals they have must actually wear many hats to meet a broad number of different requirements. These amplified requirements for balancing manageability and cost-effectiveness, in our opinion, most clearly call out key requirements that are also applicable to larger and smaller demographics. So among the key trends we discovered in the research results was the fact that enterprises are broadly recognizing the importance of ensuring that IT is focused on achieving business priorities. Now, while that may seem like common sense, focusing on supporting business priorities, traditional IT management processes had actually been developed to ensure the availability and performance of the IT systems themselves, not the business use of the IT systems. So as a consequence, in many organizations, the businesses have been utilizing valuable resources just to support the IT needs rather than making sure that IT is supporting the business itself. Now, clearly, this is changing. 74% of our surveyed respondents indicated that they had taken steps to better align IT with business objectives. This means that they have reprioritized their efforts and investments in IT support to ensure IT supports line of business requirements. Respondents were asked to report all responses that applied, which is why the number in this case actually adds up to more than 100%. It's the total of the all the challenges that they're seeing. Most frequently reported were organizations that had created cross-functional task forces and that had established integration between business and IT processes. Both approaches achieved the value of driving overall business interest over that of individual IT department silos. In other words, by ensuring that business units and support teams are working together and using common processes, they are better equipped to achieve the common goal of driving business success. The Information Technology Infrastructure Library, or ITIL, set of best practices quite frequently promotes the adoption of proactive management processes over traditional or more traditional reactive management. Now, I'm sure many of you can relate to this of working in an environment where the majority of time is spent reactively putting out fires rather than focusing on proactively preventing them from happening in the first place. This usually happens because when a problem occurs, the symptoms are patched, but the root cause is never identified. Now, for instance, rebooting a system that has, say, a hung process may temporarily improve the performance of the system, but whatever hung that process in the first place is likely to happen again, resulting in administrators perpetually wasting their time rebooting systems and disrupting business production. Ending this break-fix cycle of systemic firefighting requires the adoption of processes and automation that identify and resolve the root cause of failure events and predicts future problems so they can be preemptively resolved. Roughly 1/3 of respondents to our survey indicated that they consider their IT operations to be very proactive in their management processes. A note of caution with these results, though. This is how IT professionals actually rated their own performance in meeting business requirements. So it's possible, and actually, in my opinion, very likely that the results are skewed to suggest a higher level of proactive management than they are in reality. Nonetheless, even if you consider these results to be accurate, and this is a best case scenario, it still indicates a substantial room for improvement in enabling proactive management processes for 2/3 of enterprises that do not consider themselves to be very proactive today. We saw another interesting data point when we crossed the self-assessment results on proactive management with the introduction of a unified management console. On average, the organizations that identified themselves as being very proactive reported that 58% of their management capabilities were performed on a single console interface. Now, conversely, organizations that were very reactive only reported 44% of management tasks performed on a common console. Since these are average numbers, the 14% difference is very statistically significant and strongly suggests that the adoption of a unified console will greatly improve how proactive IT operations is in enabling problem management.
So, Steve, I want to chime in here. This is Martin from VMware. I think these numbers are quite amazing because if you go back one slide, the percentage of the group that said that very proactive was rather low at 34%, and now on the second question that you just showed, the number has increased to over 58%. And right. It sounds like a unified management console makes IT operations more proactive. Why do you think that is, and what's sort of the conclusion here for the audience?
Yeah, that's a really great question and a good place to start. Utilizing a single console interface for performing multiple management tasks simplifies administrative efforts and enables the standardization of support processes. When administrators can go to one console to standardize support processes, they can identify a problem, investigate the problem, and remediate the problem from one place. They can respond faster and more effectively to requests and incidents. Conversely, using multiple consoles results in what we call swivel chair management, where administrators are unable to coordinate or correlate information from multiple sources. Now, if you've ever had to be a human translator between two management applications, cutting and pasting data between them or manually executing tasks that should work automatically, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And actually, on that note, Martin, I'm actually very curious, is VMware seeing any increased interest in enabling or adopting a unified management console?
We do, and I actually brought a couple slides too, so if you could advance one more. I want to share with you some of the conversations that we're having when we talk to executives and leaders in infrastructure operations organizations, and it's clear that, and you can all read the quotes yourself, it's very clear that there is a need for better visibility and being able to see everything that's going on that affects your infrastructure and your applications in one place. This is not to say that people are happy with sort of the frameworks of the 90s when everything was sort of locked down in the silo. It's interesting that a lot of these things are related. For example, being able to have a complete dashboard and to drive more automation. And part of it is because we do see that IT operations teams are not managing more with the same staff, and therefore the need to have better visibility into what's driving the behavior and how things are related to one another. We also did some research ourselves here. If you could advance one more slide, please.
Sure.
That shows what's driving the need for a better visibility. And the key point that I want to make here is that basically the volume of monitoring data is growing exponentially. And it's due to, in large part, of virtualization, obviously, because virtualization introduces a new layer of abstraction for infrastructure. Shared infrastructure in the first place is creating a whole set of new metrics and alerts that you need to monitor and manage. But we're also seeing that, on the one hand, there's an increase of applications that IT operations teams are managing, but also the application structure, the architecture is changing as well, with a move towards service-oriented applications or mobile applications as well, which make it particularly difficult to monitor certain application components when they're not running on-prem and are provided as a cloud service or as a mashup type application. And that's really the challenge here, that the amount of data is increasing, the number of alerts are increasing. We call that the operations gaps. At some point, the teams can no longer keep up with it and are faced with alert storms, false positive, and what have you, and they can no longer understand the infrastructure at the level that they used to, down at the very detailed level. And so that's sort of driving need for analytics to assist the operations teams in the sort of the management of monitoring data, as well as the response, and being able to become more proactive instead of being sort of caught up in reactive processes.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. I particularly like the point about this increase in data volume, because I independently have also been looking at other research in mobility and how the use of multiple devices by business professionals to access a broader range of applications and services is just generating massive amounts of information. Of course, all of that needs to be managed and secured and made reliable and highly available. So all really good points. Moving on, let's look at some of the key challenges organizations are experiencing as they attempt to improve IT management productivity. According to our survey respondents, the meeting security and compliance requirements currently require the most manual effort. This actually isn't too surprising. The need to support an increasing mobile workforce with quick and easy access to business applications, data, and services, as Martin was just talking about. This has made it extremely challenging for organizations to lock down IT systems. Not a week goes by, actually, that we don't hear about another news report of a company or agency that has had a major security breach. I think it was just last week that we heard the U.S. National Weather Service, a government agency, had been hacked. So security and compliance concerns are most certainly justified, and the management tasks involved that involve the continuous monitoring of the entire IT infrastructure, as well as the persistent deployment of patches, updates, reconfigurations, and code fixes are required. If manual processes are employed for any of these processes, then yes, there's going to be a need to require a substantial amount of effort. So also very frequently reported as a laborious process was the performance of root cause analysis. Now, as we discussed earlier, performing root cause analysis is the key to enabling proactive IT management. However, relying on manual processes for root cause analysis requires the investigative abilities of Sherlock Holmes, and even then must be performed with a painstaking attention to detail. Root problems that may only take a minute or two to fix may actually take days to identify through purely manual processes. Also, a critical barrier to improving productivity in IT management is the reliance on independent and isolated IT departments. Now, traditional IT operations organization structures segment support responsibilities across independent groups. Now, for instance, IT operations may be segmented by the type of systems being managed: server management, a server management group, a storage management group, a cloud infrastructure management group, or they could be segmented by operating systems, a Windows support group, a Linux support group, etc., or management disciplines. Systems management, applications management, security management, and so on. Each unique IT silo supports a separate set of requirements that actually places them in direct competition with each other for enterprise resources, for budget, for staff, and other things. Unfortunately, each department may also independently adopt a unique set of management tools as well. We often call these point products that have a limited view of the IT infrastructure and limited to just the elements related to their particular role. So as a result, interdepartmental relationships often arise that impede cooperation and reduce IT operations' overall ability to support business goals. Topping the list of reported challenges that were related to siloed IT departments was unproductive finger pointing during issue resolution. I'm sure we've all experienced a little finger pointing in our careers. The reason for this is actually related to our discussion on the previous chart. Organizations that lack insights into their root cause of problems are unable to establish accountability on failure events. So siloed organizations have little incentive to take ownership of issues that may or may not be related to their particular practice areas. Now, unless the responsible party can be definitively identified, no one's going to want to stand up and accept responsibility for a time-consuming problem. And in fact, in my experience, many individuals will go to a great length to offload problems to anyone else. So provisioning challenges actually also ranked high amongst surveyed organizations, reflecting the fact that siloed organizations typically do not have an integrated approach to deployment. Each group uses its own deployment tools and provisions according to its own timetable, with little or no regard to how individual hardware and software elements are going to interact with the provisioning tasks of other departments.
Yeah, I think, Steve, this is a great point, because that's exactly some of the things we're seeing as well, especially when people are involved and the blame game begins. It seems like some people are really operating on the assumption that they're innocent until proven guilty.
It's the truth.
The question is really, I think, from the research you've done, what best practices would you advise organizations to improve interdepartmental sort of cooperation? Is there anything you can share from your interactions?
Yes, to begin, I'd recommend adopting a common interface for monitoring the entire IT infrastructure. Now, that ensures all departments are looking at the same data and following the same management processes. Also, we haven't talked about automation and analytics yet, but as we'll discuss, the two actually work in tandem to rapidly pinpoint the root cause of problems and will clearly reveal remediation responsibilities. I'll also reiterate process improvements we're seeing many organizations already adopting, such as the creation of cross-departmental task force. Now, this greatly creates a level of governance across the individual departments to ensure their activities are primarily focused on meeting broader business requirements rather than their individual self-interests. So just to return that question back to you, Martin, I have to imagine VMware has encountered this problem with a customer or two. So how are you helping organizations bridge that gap between department silos?
So there are a couple of things that we're doing, and I think let's actually, Steve, you could show the next slide. I did want to share with the audience one key point, which is related to visibility and helping to improve collaboration and communication, because a lot of the issues we're seeing with customers is that they only focus on one thing. They only focus on server performance, for example, or they only focus on database throughput, or they only focus on storage IOs. And they're not understanding that there are so many things that actually determine the health, the risk, the efficiency of the infrastructure and applications. So from our perspective, we recommend that customers really adopt a comprehensive approach to IT operations management. You need to look at your performance and availability. This is where the monitoring data comes in. You also need to look at your log files and unstructured data. You should not ignore that. A lot of customers just don't have the right tools right now to be able to process those efficiently, but they do provide sort of the bottoms-up last mile of root cause and data in a lot of times. You also need to understand your dependencies, which we call topology analysis, being able to understand the cause and effect. When you change one thing over here, what does that impact in terms of other systems that might be affected in the parent-child relationship or noise and neighbor problems, if you will. So it's very important to look at dependencies across the environment. Another point here is not just looking at performance and capacity, actually performance information, you also want to look at your configuration health. This is something that we see oftentimes leading to downtime because configuration changes that were deemed safe to roll into production were not fully tested, or there's always some sort of a condition, a side effect that was not fully understood previously, and that's sort of starting to cause a ripple effect onto other systems. So being able to correlate performance with dependencies, with configuration health, and lastly, capacity data is something that we recommend all our customers to look at. Don't just focus on one silo. Look at the landscape comprehensively, and also think about, what is your strategy to analyze the data that you're collecting from the various monitoring tools and element managers. We see that usually one tool does not fit all needs, and it's best oftentimes to separate the data collection from the data analytics and invest in tools that, including open source. I'm not saying you shouldn't, just always go buy tools, but always look at what the metrics are that you're collecting, or where do you have gaps in terms of coverage across these 5 dimensions here, and then how you're analyzing and correlating the data holistically in your environment. So that's, I think, one important recommendation from an architectural standpoint, to look at what you have covered today and what your gaps are. This is going back to what we talked earlier about when we talked about the explosion of the monitoring data in the environment. You also need to look at, are there any gaps in the environment you need to cover? There's another point, too, that I want to make here is, Stephen, this is going back to the earlier point around compliance and security management. So if you could advance one more slide, please.
Sure.
I also want to give some recommendations here in terms of making sure that your control and compliance is comprehensive. So that includes things like security hardening of your vSphere infrastructure. It includes vendor best practices in terms of hardening and configuring optimally your Windows deployments or your Linux configurations or any other vendors that you work with. You also need to think about what are the regulatory compliance regulations that you have to observe and implement in your organizations, especially those related to PCI. If you process credit card information, or if you're a healthcare organization, you know HIPAA quite well, I'm assuming. So these are some of the things that you need to think about. Don't just look at this as another silo, another team. In fact, configuration, compliance needs to become a first-class citizen from an IT operations standpoint as well. Look at the performance, look at the capacity, configuration, and compliance holistically and together. Don't just separate those out and treat them as another silo, another team, because that is when you start to get into the, find a needle in the haystack type issues, and you start to get into projects that blow your time and budget out of the water because you have deferred it for too long. And it's best to always stay on top of it. But again, that requires the ability to have the analytics in place to automatically analyze a lot of these things without too much manual or human intervention.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more on all of your points there. In fact, it's a great segue to the next section. I don't think it's a coincidence that we both brought up the importance of automation and analytics in our recommendations on dealing with siloed organizations. These are two key elements that work synergistically to achieving effective IT operations. So let's start by taking a close look at automation. So the automation of complex tasks, such as provisioning, system configuration, security assurance, and performance management. These enable the rapid and accurate performance of critical administrative tasks. Automation assists with the rapid identification and remediation of failure events as well. According to our survey results, the vast majority of enterprises, 96% in fact, have adopted at least some automation solutions. However, more than half of the respondents also noted that they did not consider themselves fully automated yet. So breaking this out by respondents from key industry segments, finance and high technology businesses appear to have more broadly adopted automation capabilities than other industries, while manufacturing businesses are substantially lacking in automating IT management processes. We also asked respondents to tell us the primary reasons for adopting automation solutions to support server, network, and storage resources. We broke them out into those three categories. Improving IT performance and addressing security concerns top the list of all three adoption drivers for all three categories. However, some other interesting areas also were called out. For example, disaster recovery and business continuity ranked very high with server automation adopters, while compliance concerns were important to the adoption of network automation. Storage automation was frequently used to support capacity concerns. Now, Automation certainly provides a broad range of value to business performance, many of which are listed on this chart. When we asked respondents to identify the areas to which automation delivers the most value, the most frequently indicated was reducing operational costs. Second on the list was automation's ability to improve problem identification and root cause analysis. Automation is used for monitoring and alarming to ensure administrators are immediately alerted to both problems and potential problems as soon as or very shortly after they arise. Also, automated capabilities for event correlation, change detection, and configuration intelligence can greatly assist with targeting the true root cause of problems. So we could talk a little bit about how automation helps organizations reduce operational costs as some advice. There's actually a few ways that are surprisingly easy to quantify. Automation allows fewer administrators to perform a greater number of tasks in a shorter period of time, and this frees up administrators to focus on other business IT requirements rather than having to hire additional staff. Automation also improves IT efficiency, enabling the reduction of both capital and operational expenses. Now, for instance, automation can be used to ensure systems are used to their maximum capacity by supporting compact but reliable workload densities. And the reliable part of that statement is actually very important. There are often systems are often over-provisioned to preserve their reliable performance levels. Now, you're probably familiar with the so-called rule of thumb that says you should never provision a server more than, say, 50% of its capacity. But that means 50% of the business investment is sitting idle and unused. Automated monitoring and management solutions can ensure the continuous, reliable performance of systems running at a much higher load percentage. Automation also extends the life of IT investments and minimizes the refresh rates of hardware and software components. However, while automation is certainly the workhorse for enabling proactive IT management, it requires the application of analytics to bring intelligence to that solution. So before we move on to discussion on and looking at the research results on analytics, Martin, I wonder if you could share with us some of the results you've seen from VMware customers who have already adopted an analytics-oriented IT management approach.
Absolutely. I just want to reemphasize the last point you made, that a lot of organizations have adopted automation primarily to automate the provisioning of servers or network resources and environment, but that's usually where automation stops, okay? And the question is, how do we utilize automation more broadly in the organization, and how do we use it more pervasively? And this is really the point where analytics can help drive a higher adoption of automation in the first place, because the combination of analytics with automation is what actually is going to increase quite a bit the efficiency that we're talking about here. So Steve, why don't you show one of the slides I brought today. And what we did is, this is actually a comparative study we did where we looked at some VMware customers that just had deployed vSphere for virtualization and nothing else. And the second group, the control group, was based on some customers that actually also used one of our analytics solutions. And we wanted to see, is there a difference in terms of the proactive nature of operations when analytics is in play, as well as automation to automatically reclaim capacity or to kick off some remediation workflows in a more proactive manner? And the results are actually quite interesting, because what you see here is that the group that was using analytics reported much better visibility into the environment. They understood much better when issues were arising in the environment that were potentially leading to performance degradation before end users are impacted. So better visibility is a key benefit that we observe very clearly with customers that have deployed analytics in their environment. But then the numbers get even better when we look at cost and downtime reduction. And this is what you said earlier, being able to understand not only when a server is over-provisioned, but is it a necessary over-provisioning or is it an unnecessary provisioning buffer that really never is being tapped into that you can right-size and reclaim. And this is what's driving the cost savings, both on the CapEx side, in terms of being able to drive higher consolidation ratios and being able to increase the number of workloads that are running in your environment without increasing your server footprint, but also on the operating side in terms of the automation of workflows and being able to tie best practices, recommendations, and remediation workflows to the analytics itself. That is actually what's driving really the additional cost reduction that we're seeing as well. And then the other benefit here that's probably even more beneficial for end users is the decrease in downtime, because IT is able to, first of all, not only detect issues sooner, they're also able to avoid those issues from impacting users in the first place. And that's what's driving the decrease in downtime here.
Great. That's actually very consistent with, I think, the results we found from the recent research. While automated monitoring solutions will consolidate IT status and health data into a centralized location, it is really just creating a humongous pile of mostly irrelevant information. Isolating data that may indicate a problem is like searching for that proverbial needle in a haystack. And the value of analytics is that it cuts through all the noise to just target the relevant information necessary to identify or resolve a problem. So it's like having a magnet. Analytics is the magnet you use to search the haystack. While only 27% of surveyed organizations indicated that they had adopted analytics-based operations management tools in our research, an additional 41% stated that they were planning to adopt a solution in the near future. Survey respondents broadly indicated proactive alerts to be the most valuable feature in an IT operations analytics tool, emphasizing the importance of rapid problem identification. Now, secondarily, enabling the automating problem resolution was also noted as providing critical value. So working together, these two analytical processes can rapidly identify and resolve problems as they occur with little or no administrator interaction, and substantially decreasing or even eliminating failure events and downtime. While comprehensive and unified visibility will centrally collect all data on the state of an IT stack, identifying which individual pieces of information are essential and how they are correlated is time-consuming and impractical to perform through purely manual processes. So analytics cuts through that noise to target specific details that are essential to determining the exact point of a failure so it can be resolved before business productivity is impacted. Taking this concept a step further, predictive analytics leverages the patterns in historical trends and user-defined thresholds and metrics to actually predict the future state of the environment. So potential problems can be resolved or avoided before they occur. When asked to identify the most valuable use cases for predictive analytics, security was again called out as a primary benefit. Now, you'll recall that security is a leading concern for IT operations, and with good reason. While performance and availability issues are disruptive, they can be remediated. However, a security breach incident cannot be rolled back. Therefore, proactively assessing security threats and breach potential is essential to mitigating business risks and to meet regulatory compliance objectives. Respondents also noted the ability to proactively identify issues as a key value achieved from the adoption of predictive analytics.
Mm-hmm. So this is a great point, because there are seemingly two areas here. One is security related and the other one is more performance related. But exactly in your mind, Steve, how does predictive analytics actually improve security and issue identification?
Yeah, any IT infrastructure should be thought of as a complex ecosystem of interrelated hardware and software elements. additions, changes, and reconfigurations applied to any single elements in the ecosystem can have a profound effect on the performance of some or all of the other elements in the environment. It's a domino effect. So predictive analytics understands the relationship of these elements and can rapidly and accurately determine which specific components will be affected by changing conditions. So this enables informed decision making on the deployment of new services and where to plug security holes and how to optimize configurations. So Martin, could you share with us some of the best practices VMware has seen from customers who have successfully implemented predictive analytics?
Yeah, so there are two things I would like to mention in this context here. One is more of the architecture that you should consider for introducing analytics into your environment, and then secondarily, the best practices or processes that you could follow to deploy that successfully. So let's talk about the architecture first. If you could advance to the next slide, please.
Sure.
So this is sort of like a high-level diagram that basically depicts on the far right elements of your infrastructure, from your server hardware, from storage, from your operating systems that are either virtualized or physical, applications and middleware as well. And as you go from the right to the left, you'll see that you'll probably have a good number of monitoring tools or element managers already in your environment. They either came with the storage array or you bought them as an add-on to manage an application or so, okay? But they're all very specifically focused on that particular part of your infrastructure or hardware or applications. They don't give you that sort of comprehensive view that we've been talking about previously. But then what you want to do is basically connect your monitoring data or the monitoring tools with the analytics platform whose job it is to basically process historical information, to build dynamic thresholds, to understand what are the deviations on a daily basis. You don't have to manage these thresholds directly, but that can be adjusted automatically, and that also provides the correlation between application-level performance with hardware-related and infrastructure performance as well. But then the other value that the analytics platform provides is that it gives you another layer of abstraction, because rather than managing and monitoring 500 plus individual metrics that are, let's just say, coming out of vSphere, the focus shifts now to a high level health risk and efficiency score that allows you to understand what's really impacting the workload or the performance of your IT environment. And the reason why we're doing this is because we need to deploy the tools that are good at monitoring or collecting data in that context, and we need to use an analytics solution that is good at doing analytics. And together, we have now a very scalable architecture that allows you to deploy this in a small environment where you have only a bunch of servers, as well as a very large environment where you may have a combination of x86 systems, Unix systems, maybe even some mainframe, maybe some departmental tools as well, because the analytics is independent of the number of tools or the type of infrastructure that you have in the environment. So now when you look at some of the best practices that we're seeing, so Steve, you could actually move on to the next slide, please.
Sure.
There are a couple of recommendations that I'd like to give the audience, and this is sort of a step process here. First step would be to really think about what are the key performance indicators and metrics that will impact or drive or actually express the performance of individual components of your stack. Okay, really work with the vendors that you use today to understand what is actually a good indicator for performance of your server environment, for your applications or your databases or your firewalls or your load balancers, and focus on data collection in the first place. A lot of customers make the mistake of focusing on the user interface and the bells and whistles and how pretty it looks, and they don't look at what are the metrics that are provided. And so you really want to focus on the metrics and look at the UI last. And in that sense, you need to think about, do you have complete coverage of metrics for all the components in your infrastructure and environment that you need to monitor? And then you can move on to the next step. In fact, from a VMware perspective, we would say that you want to start with vSphere first, and then gradually add on other components that you have in the environment to the analytics platform. For example, a good next step would be from vSphere to then include the storage metrics from your storage array and the vendor you use for that. And then another step after that would be to also include maybe monitoring data from the operating systems, and maybe a step after that would be to also include database metrics as well. You really don't want to boil the ocean and plug 300 different tools right away into an analytics platform. You want to do a stepwise approach here, and maybe do this in phases too, and see how things are going before you move on to the next phase. The third step is important because this is where we now link the analytics with the automation. You really want to build your own personal library of best practices and repeatable workflows that are very specific to your environment, or maybe that are actually including some of the vendor best practices also, because different vendors have different best practices for how their environment should be configured. But this is something that is very, very personal. You can actually go out in the community and ask other IT managers what makes sense for their environment, but best practices may not always be best for you, which is why you need to build your own personal library of things that you have seen occur in your behavior, in your environment, document those behaviors, and then also document the remediation steps you took so that when these situations arise again in the future, you basically have a recipe for how to deal with it going forward. And once you have that recipe, you can then more easily turn that into a repeatable workflow that you can associate with an alert that comes from the analytics platform that recognizes that pattern based on the monitoring data that you're feeding into it. And then the fourth step is important as well, because this is now where the people process issue gets tied into the technology. You want to incent your team to focus on issue prevention rather than issue sort of reacting to those issues. A lot of companies are ticket-driven or incident-driven. They're very good at firefighting, but they're not very good at looking at the radar to see what's coming up and avoiding collisions in the first place, if you pardon my analogy here. So you really want to reward individuals for their efforts, give them better, like a better parking spot, for example, or buy them free lunch, or have sort of a top 10 charts of the number of incidents avoided per IT administrator environment. These things really incent good behavior that you want to drive from a cultural standpoint. And this is really where a lot of organizations fall short, because they focus too much on technology and don't spend enough time thinking about the people aspect and the emotional aspect of being able to proactively identify and avoid issues in the first place. And that actually ties into the fifth point as well, which is something that we've seen quite a bit, that IT managers or administrators are not very good at marketing their own success. So document your near misses and share your success with other teams as well as end users. I don't know how many of you guys are doing an IT newsletter that you send out to the rest of the employees in the company, but you should really talk about some of those things that prove the value that you provide to the organization. And don't be shy about holding back your accomplishments, okay? This is really where you can close it and make sure that the rest of the organizations understands how important and strategic the IT department is to the business operations. So in a nutshell, these are some of these 5 best practices that we see companies that have done this successfully, and that I think you should consider as well.
This is really good advice, Martin. I have to say, I hope folks are taking notes out there. This is it strikes me that this is very consistent with ITIL's set of best practices. For example, this idea of systematically introducing solutions on a step-by-step basis rather than trying to drink the ocean, as you said. It's very consistent with established best practices. So this is an excellent path to adoption for analytics. And actually, good segue to just summarize some of the key findings from our research. IT operations requirements and responsibilities are evolving. There's no question. 70% of respondents indicated roles across siloed IT departments are converging, and 74% are currently taking steps to better align IT with business objectives. Meeting security and compliance requirements were identified as the most significant challenges to IT operations today, but both were also called out as primary drivers for adopting automation and analytics. The adoption of predictive analytics in particular was determined to be a key enabler for ensuring security and implementing proactive issue identification. So across the board, the message is clear. The successful management of business-focused IT services requires the adoption of proactive management processes that can only be enabled with the assistance of unified monitoring, effective automation, and predictive analytics, all working in concert and accessible from a common console. So with that, I think we have a few minutes here. I'd like to turn it over to Raleigh to drive us through our Q&A and encourage folks to write some questions.
Thank you, Steve. Before I jump into questions, I did want to point this additional resource out to our audience. This will also be part of the follow-up email you'll get from EMA tomorrow. I'm going to go ahead and ask some of the questions that have come in, and Steve and Martin, I'm going to throw it out there for both of you for your feedback, or whoever wants to take it. The first question is, yeah, so that's good. The first question is, what should businesses look for in a unified management solution?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. I would say, because certainly Martin, I think, laid out a good path to adoption there. From my perspective, before actually evaluating solutions, I'd advise organizations to first determine exactly what their current business requirements are and to predict what their future requirements will be so that the solution can be sized appropriately. What does IT need to support today, and what can you expect that they'll need to support tomorrow? So armed with this information, look for solutions that integrate management capabilities that support the breadth of those particular requirements and are able to do so from a single unified console. Specifically, all the solution features should be accessible from a single interface. All infrastructure health and status data should be collected into a common centralized data repository, and a single analytics-based reporting engine should be employed to parse that data and alert on any existing or potential issues. Martin, is there anything you want to add to that, or did I cover it all?
Yeah, and I would just add that, so don't get hung up on the word single management interface, right, because it doesn't mean single user interface for everybody, because we fully understand that the different teams have different needs and different needs in terms of visualizing the data point. But the point here is you want to have a common place where you do your analytics and then you can visualize data that is specific to the different teams that you're supporting. The one thing that I'd like to add here is to make sure that whatever you do is comprehensive. Don't just focus on one particular silo, such as performance data or availability data. Make sure that you have a good solution in place that looks at all the IT data that is driving the performance of SLAs overall of your environment, including capacity, including configuration events, including topology information, as well as the log data. That's really sort of the key from my perspective, to make sure that you have something that allows you to give you a 360-degree view of what's really driving the behavior and the health of your infrastructure.
Thank you, Steve and Martin. And the next question is, can you both provide some insight in terms of what you're seeing regarding maintaining security and compliance with siloed organizations?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I can certainly understand the challenge for many organizations. As siloed IT organizations struggle to meet their own individual requirements, it's easy for them to independently overlook broader compliance requirements across the whole business. So the answer is really governance. And I think actually earlier Martin actually covered a great deal in talking in general about how to manage these governance across siloed organizations. He covered that very well. But a cross-functional task force in general should be created that monitors processes and activities across the various siloed organizations to ensure that they are all in sync with established policies. Now, naturally, that level of oversight can't be performed through purely manual processes. So both automated monitoring and analytics should be employed to ensure all departments are consistently compliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that this is actually a great point to start talking about ways to reduce the siloed nature in organizations, right? What can we do to improve collaboration and communication? Because at the end of the day, we're all sitting in the same boat, okay? This is not the multiple companies that working together in each of the departments. This is one organization that has specialized functions potentially to focus on certain things. But you really want to ensure that there's a sufficient level of collaboration and communication going on between the different teams and groups.
Great, thank you. Let's take one final question. What kinds of proactive alerts are enabled by analytics? What are you both seeing?
Yeah, that's kind of a big question because there's really quite a few. Some examples would be a system that has experienced a slow degradation in performance. Right. So not only it's not enough to pass a threshold that would issue a failure alarm, but it's consistent enough that you know it will cause a problem if it's allowed to continue. Now, predictive analytics will pick up on that and report it to IT ops, so it can be fixed before it impacts business productions. Similarly, predictive analytics can be used to identify upcoming capacity issues or to determine when hardware components will need to be replaced or to discover potential security breaches, as we've already talked about. So the question really isn't what can it do with analytics, it's really what do you need to know, and that's going to be independent to each organization.
Yeah, that's a great point, and the only other thing I would like to add here is that don't rely on analytics too much because otherwise you'll be managing the environment by looking into the rear view mirror, okay? You also need to understand what's coming up and other ways to model out different projects or changes in demand to start to influence analytics for upcoming activities, right? Because learned behavior is only looking at prior events. It doesn't know what's coming up when there's significant changes that could then throw off the analytics. And so it's important to look at not only the historical behavior, but also the current activities that are happening right now in terms of availability, but also the planned or expected changes in demand that might influence overall the environment as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve and Martin, for taking those questions. And I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of your schedules to join us today. As I mentioned at the start of the event, I'll be sending out an email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow that will include this on-demand playback as well as a free white paper on today's topic. So I hope that you check that out. Thanks again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.